Hi, good morning. I am Christine Joy Rodriguez from Educational Leadership and Management, and I will be sharing to you a review of teaching philosophy in Europe and North America. So, just to give you a short background and introduction, on February 14 to 16, 2011, Italy hosted a high-level regional meeting on the teaching of philosophy in Europe and North America. It was held at the Libera Università di Lingua e Comunicazione or ULM in Milan. It has 70 participants, including delegates from 12 countries in the region, philosophers, inspectors, and philosophy teachers, and students at primary, secondary, and higher education levels. So, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So, this famous sentence was excerpted from preamble, which is the fundamental principle with the emphasis on minds of men and women to reflect and question or to philosophize. Therefore, debates never stop. But one thing that everyone agrees on is that philosophy is unique in terms of methods and principles. The long-term result being its contribution to the fight against ignorance, dogmatism, and fanaticism. How to capture the attention of young people? So, the only question is this: how to capture the attention of young people who today are increasingly caught up and fascinated by the new and advanced technology. Philosophy teachers offer a possible solutions by being innovative and creative. They look for strategies to make philosophy appealing so that young people will be encouraged to philosophize. So, these are the purpose of the meeting. High-level regional meeting on the teaching of philosophy in Europe and North America was brought to a series of meetings launched by UNESCO in 2009 to promote the teaching philosophy throughout the world. This meeting has two main purposes. Number one is to take stock of the current state of philosophy teaching in different countries involved and to consider the challenges this teaching faces at the present time. Number two, to draw up recommendations for the benefit of the participants, notably the public bodies responsible for school and university education, with the aim of either introducing philosophy into the curriculum or importantly, where the discipline is already on offer. With these purposes, the meeting aims to address several distinct sets of questions. So the first question is questions relating to the history of philosophy in Europe. As we all know, Europe is the center of philosophy. Great philosophers were from Europe, and basically, school of wisdom was given birth in the regions of Europe. Based on observation, it is clear that Spain, France, Italy, and Portugal are those countries where philosophy teaching is firmly embedded in the system as well established tradition, while on countries like Germany, Austria, Benelux countries, Denmark, and Great Britain, teaching philosophy as a hard time to stay and represented. So the first question is questions relating to the history of philosophy in Europe. In the final analysis, therefore, the challenge facing the teaching of philosophy is a highly political one. The fact that the teaching of philosophy fares so differently is basically the result of the differences of opinion, divide Europe on the nature of democracy. Instruction in philosophy will hardly be given the same treatment in a consensus democracy or Anglo-Saxon style as in a country with a secular republican tradition. So the role and place of philosophy, particularly in secondary school, seemingly open and unending debate of whether to teach philosophy or not. So factors that affect this includes the school's mission regarding education and training because European countries, even worldwide, are adapting to more technical relevant courses and practical based result and applicant due to increasing demand in digitization worldwide. So the question for social is the role and the place of the human sciences in the education of young people today. Given its dialectical and argumentative nature, which is dependent on the use of concepts that are logically comprehensive to everyone, philosophy seems to offer real advantages for the creation of conditions conducive to dialogue. Therefore, philosophy would not only play part in intellectual aspect of people, but would also help to build and strengthen social cohesion in multicultural societies. The third question for geopolitical is from division to union. First one, how has the teaching of philosophy changes since the end of the Cold War? Uh, the, the answer is there was training of philosophy for teachers, creation of philosophy departments and staffs whose tasks would be focused on putting together suitable courses. Next is, to what extent is European integration influencing education policy in general and conceptions of teaching philosophy, moral values, ethics, and religion in particular? The answer is there's a regional integration within the European Union. In fact, among eight key competencies highlighted in Key Competencies for Lifelong Learning, a European reference framework published in 2007, social and civic competencies involves ability to communicate constructively in different environments, show tolerance, express and understand different viewpoints. So it is believed that new ideas and innovations are born from the coming together of different kinds of knowledge and through the curiosity-driven search for new knowledge. That is why it is crucial to recognize that quality education and research in social sciences and humanities play an important role in innovation. This was based on the conclusion of the Council and the representatives of the government of the members of states meeting on November 26, 2009. So, higher education institutions both in Europe and America are actively involved in exchange among students, researchers, and teachers. So, questions relating to international cooperation on education. A European country is seeking to further develop its policy of promoting mobility, which is contingent on the creation of a system for harmonizing degrees and exchanging information and encourages periods of study abroad, both in Europe itself and in other parts of the world. The last question is pertaining to pedagogical innovation in the learning process. The various philosophical practices outside the classroom are becoming increasingly popular, whether in the form of philosophy cafes or as philosophy in the workplace, in prisons, or even in psychiatric hospitals, or etc. Continuous engagement of young people in irrational discussion, exchange of ideas, practical researches, and production of teaching materials and textbooks are those of current learning processes in Europe and America and even in other countries. This book has three parts. The first one is preschool and primary levels. Next is secondary level, and the third part is higher education. So let's start with the first teaching at preschool and primary level. So a good basic education does not perceive school as places for the mere transmission and assimilation of knowledge, but rather for questioning and as the best time to learn from learning the treasure within report to UNESCO of the International Commission on Education for the 21st century in Paris in year 1996. So, children are perceived as natural philosophers. Toddlers started to ask a series of questions. They start to ask, what? Later on, they will ask follow-up questions like, why, how, when, where. Example, when you say, don't talk when your mouth is full, they will nod and say, opo, or yes, mama. Then some will ask, why, mama? After I eat, can I talk again? So questions are natural in toddlers and preschoolers until grade school. So there are approaches and practices in philosophy with children. The first one is Matthew Lipman method. Lipman developed his method gradually, basing it pedagogically on the concept of active learning, by Dewey, Psychologically on the Theories of Child Development by Piaget, and Philosophically on Method of Reasoning, derived from the Western philosophical traditions or from Aristotelian logic, the Cartesian cogito. There are three key aspects to the method. First, it develops a classroom culture of asking questions, focusing on the question of the children themselves. Second, it uses textbooks that have a marked anthropological content and are based on a story, which makes it easy for children to identify with the characters and situations. And third, it turns the classroom into an organized space where the children can discuss human problems with each of them, having democratically their turn to speak, but on the understanding that with the right to express their opinion comes the duty to argue rationally. Next approach is democratic philosophical method. This method is based on the work of Professor Michael Tosi. The objectives pursued are similar to Lipman's, but Tosi recommends setting up a democratic structure that assigns a specific function to each pupil and makes intellectual demands on them in order that they develop their philosophical skills. So, this innovation in classroom practice is backed up by training and research. The third one is Socratic method of Oscar Benifer. The approach of that adopted by Benifer is Socratic miotics. Pupils are schooled to think logically and pertinently through closely monitored group discussion, in which they ask questions, rephrase ideas, and raise objections. Brenifer, rather, has produced a large body of teaching materials both in France and abroad, including Philosophizes, published by Nathan, and The Adventures of Milan, published by Autrement Junus. It is the teacher who guides the class, setting high intellectual standards. The last one is the method of Jacques Levin. He is a developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst who back in 1996 devised a teaching and research method for children from the middle years of nursery school or 3 to 4 years through secondary school, which is 15 to 16 years old. It consists of the teacher introducing in a fairly formal manner a topic or question that concerns both adults and children, and telling the class that the teacher would be very interested in hearing what the children think. They are given 10 minutes or so to discuss the subject. With the teacher remaining silent, a baton is passed around to give each child the chance to speak. The session is recorded and the tape is then played back to the children, who can interrupt at any point, add to the discussion. This psychological strand focuses on the experience of the cogito. He explicitly refers to the carts through which the child joins humanity in a group of cogitans or young thinkers. Learning to philosophize an expanding field. So I will be sharing the first four countries in Europe and America. The first one is Austria. P4C in Austria has begun in 1981 as an educational project. Council of Philosophy teachers became involved, resulted to possibilities of introducing P4C in programs in schools in 1982. First lessons were given in 1983, and it follows a pilot of P4C program in schools in 1984. It was then in 1985 where Austrian Center of Philosophy with Children, or ACPC, was founded. The ACPC goal is to promote philosophical inquiry as part of primary and secondary curriculum. It is also a founding member of the Sophia Network of European teachers, philosophers, teacher educators, and parents interested in doing philosophy with children. The next is Canada. Work on philosophy is being undertaken in 3 provinces in Canada, in British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec. Next is Czech Republic. In University of South Bohemia, Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies from Theology Faculty and Department of Pedagogy and Psychology from Education Faculty are working closely on a P4C project. Next is Germany. P4C was developed by 2 researchers in Germany. These are Prof. Eckhard Martens of University of Hamburg and Professor Carl Friedrich Herf of University of Regensburg. Both professors has a great contribution for the development of P4C in Germany and resulted to a favorable outcome for the students and the teachers. Other countries who has philosophizing is the France, Italy, Spain, Norway. We also have United Kingdom and United States of America, as well as Belgium. The first challenge is what are the challenges facing the generalization and institutionalization of philosophy with children? So, teaching philosophy at preschool and primary level is facing different challenges. First is the experimentation, which involves a political decision to introduce a new practice in a national education system on a limited scale. Next is trial programs benefit from special funding. Teaching resources are usually carried out according to precise procedures, and how they can incorporate philosophy in curriculum of all year levels. Ages of children given with the same question might taken up and explore differently the topic. The next challenge is what role and what kind of training should a teacher have? How much guidance should the teacher give? How much input should the teacher provide? Should the teacher have an academic training in philosophy, didactic training in the skills of philosophy, pedagogical training in debate? So these are some of the questions that need to be raised when the role of teacher is considered in the teaching of philosophy at preschool and primary level. So during the meeting in Milan, participants insisted that teacher training is essential so that philosophical practices with children do not become a vehicle for intellectual relativism. Philosophizing with children is easy, just a simple conversation and exchange of opinions between teachers and students. This concept will soon perceive as anti-intellectualism because all ideas seems equally valid and that thinking is same as expressing opinions. So the role of teacher is a much debated issue among teacher trainers, researchers, and PPRC practitioners. There are several different schools of thoughts, some drawn from meiotics, in which the teacher maintains complete control over dialogues, asking the children to respond to him or her, and talking about discussion. Others feel that the teacher should they actively direct discussions, interactions being less important than establishing habits of rational debate. Others still prepare a model where the children talk among themselves with the teacher remaining silent. And there are those who argue for a process in which children interact progressively more with each other. Via the gradual withdrawal of the discussion leader, the objective being to generate peer dialogue. Then again, there's Lipman's method of a community of inquiry, or that Michael Tusi, in which pupils are assigned precise roles and the discussion takes place within a controlled classroom environment. The difference between these approaches are not just differences of detail, but they are conceptual. So number three challenge is what teaching materials should be developed. So these include textbooks written specifically for children, information for teachers, as well as teaching material aimed at both. So for example, textbooks for public for pupils often have companion teacher manuals, while some books for teachers simply present paper's practices to inform teachers about them and to try to stimulate their interest. Others offer detailed examples and instructions for in-class activities. So there are 6 ways to develop appropriate teaching materials. The first one is translating Lipman's purpose written stories. Lipman's stories to be modified to make them more meaningful in terms of the culture, tradition, and context of particular country. New books have been written for children in the style of Lipman. New or improvised materials can be written narratives as with Lipman, or they can take the form of picture books, comic books, even films. Another possibility for those who find Lipman's story not very literary or too didactic for children is to base P4C classes on other books, specifically written for children. And a similar process of engaging developing critical thinking can be activated by the folktales, legends, and fables that form part of children's cultural heritage and common human heritage. So, by the way, Lipman's method was prominent in P4C already tried and tested, and so not likely to change. It is one of the reasons why many countries followed his method. Number four question is, how can thrive and true practices in philosophy with children be shared? So leaders of PhilOlab or association in France and ICPIC, International Council for Philosophical Inquiry with Children, a field for the creation of a network which aimed to pool resources and information through an international platform of data. So debate and exchanges on research, pedagogical methods, practices, and experiments. It also aimed to foster interconnections around the world between well-intentioned supporters who want to act in favor of philosophy with children practices but do not know how. So the second part of this book is teaching philosophy at secondary level. So during adolescence, our relationship to the world, to others, and to ourselves set in motion a process of structuring and problematic restructuring. With its questioning, fears, joys, and suffering, in addition, our perception of others changes as it becomes a determinant factor in the way we see ourselves and react. In adolescence, therefore, um, the time is ripe for philosophical questioning. As we all know, adolescence period is the transitional period where developmental change happens, physically, emotionally, and mentally. A wider scope of critical thinking is now emanating in the minds of the students. So, teaching philosophy at secondary level should thus find a legitimate place in the education system. So the first challenge is, what place is to be given to philosophy in adolescence? Philosophy is traditionally taught in the last 2 years of secondary school in Baccalaureate in two courses. One is called Philosophical Concepts or Philosophia 1, and the other is History of Philosophy or Philosophia 2, with each course being allocated 3 hours a week. In 2006, the Organic Law of Education changed the title of Philosophia 1 to Philosophy and Citizenship, schooling it towards a course in civic education and serving its connections with the sister subject, History of Philosophy. Lastly, the Royal Decree of 2007 on core subjects in the Baccalaureate now makes it possible to reduce the number of hours for each course to 2 weeks, or 2 per week. These reforms have given rise to protests in several regions. Some regions have actually reduced the number of hours already in line with the decree, sometimes with the intention of introducing a new sciences subject. Others have decided to stick to the old timetable. The risk involved in reducing teaching hours for philosophy is a serious one. Philosophy teachers will no longer have enough time to explain and to contextualize the different theories and political positions, and will have to fall back on static presentations and so run the risk of appearing dogmatic and exposing themselves to charges of indoctrination. The very reason of reduction of hours of teaching philosophy, according to the observers, is the requirement of the labor market wherein new technologies are increasingly dominating. But policymakers need to consider the technology and new technologies tend to have a short shelf life, which means that in span of 5 to 10 years, their knowledge will be out of date. So education focused on technology will produce graduates who are already obsolete. So in Estonia, philosophy is still part of the core curriculum. Recent changes to the secondary curriculum, in effect from September 2013, will force all secondary schools to offer pupils who want them two philosophy options: an introduction to philosophical thought and contemporary philosophical problems. In today's world, we constantly witness, in many forms and to varying degrees, expressions of anger, rejection, incomprehension, and frustration, which have their origin in a demand for identity and a refusal to make the intellectual effort to analyze and understand the effect of absence of philosophy teaching in the schools as a discipline based on the exercise of rational and detached reflection that takes it as its starting point universally comprehensible concepts. Philosophy offers instruments that are conducive to the construction of dialogues argued rationally and calmly. The second challenge is philosophy vis-à-vis courses in confessional moral education and civic education. The relationship between philosophy and confessional moral education and or civic education is conceived in one of three ways. The first one is uh, it posits a relation of identity or assimilation. The first scenario is underpinned by the fairly widespread idea that the function and aims of teaching philosophy at secondary level are the same for courses in confessional moral education and civic education. According to this view, courses in philosophy, moral education, and ethics, and even civic education are intended to inform the judgment, behavior, and actions of young people through studying the moral principles drawn from the religious texts or from the legal text that exists in the country in question or in another country. In Ireland, during the last year of secondary education, they have state religion syllabus, which includes ethics and strong orientation towards the study of philosophy. In Estonia, philosophy appears under the title Ethical Systems throughout history. In Norway, philosophical and ethical subject matter are taught at primary and secondary levels in a course entitled Christian Knowledge, Religious Education, and Ethics. We find then in these countries that there is no hard and fast distinction between philosophy, moral education, ethics, and education in citizenship. The next one is philosophy is offered to those pupils who do not wish to take a course in religion. Philosophy is by no means compulsory, then targeting instead a specific group of pupils. This is the situation in certain German landers such as Bavaria and Salzburg. And then the third one is it officially there is no course of specifically called philosophy, but a course in non-confessional moral education, delivered in tandem with the course on religion and aimed at introducing pupils to the study rather of moral problems without reference to a particular religion. Such teaching obviously deals with philosophical ideas and concepts, but the object is not to study the history of philosophy, nor to analyze philosophical texts objectively, but to instill the pupils the moral principles that are indispensable to their standard of behavior. The most significant example here is Belgium, where the official wording of the syllabus for the course in moral education, which comes straight from the ministry to the French community of Belgium. The third challenge is thematic or chronological approaches. How should they be integrated? So the thematic approach is seen as approaching philosophy through a study of the great philosophical issues and related concepts, whereas the chronological approach is said to transmit philosophical knowledge in the form of an account of the history of philosophy itself, starting from the philosophers of antiquity through the philosophers of our own time. So advocates of the historical approach criticize the thematic approach as being too abstract as it tends, according to them, to overprivilege speculation about the concept without any reference to the context in which the philosophical debates emerge. Conversely, the charge leveled against the chronological approach is that it is too much like a formal lectures, consisting as it does in giving an account of the different philosophical doctrines, which are thus in danger of being perceived by pupils as static dogs. However, when it comes to actual teaching of philosophy, the two approaches should feed each other and can only have real impact on pupils if they are joined up. So the number 4 challenge is competency-based approach. What are the advantages and problems in philosophy courses? In education science, the competency-based approach has become increasingly important in European countries since the 1990s. This approach has been strongly supported and promoted by the European Union as a response to the unprecedented social and economic changes in Europe, where scientific and technological progress, especially in the communications industry, have promoted international integration and cooperation but also intensified international competition And according to the European Commission, this situation requires that European education systems should put in place pedagogical approaches that are capable of um, reconciling and the reconciling the competitive dimension of a society that promotes excellence, efficiency, diversity, and choice, and the cooperative dimensions that support social justice and equality of opportunities, solidarity, and tolerance. The competency-based approach is therefore conceived as a pedagogical approach aimed at responding to a cultural and socio-economic context, which all the analysis tells us has become more complex. So, first is there is another aspect to consider. Combining the teaching of philosophy with the issue of competences comes up against two kinds of problem, which are important to examine. The first is debates generated by the competency-based approach have drawn particular attention to the fact that it risks creating the impression that there is an opposition between competencies and knowledge. As some experts remind us, it would be as well to make sure that concentrating on skills does not mean abandoning knowledge and the opportunity to build a culture of the world in the pupil's mind, nor elevating the students or the status of low level, easily assessed, but poorly developed skills. The notion of key skills, for instance, as it appears in some documents. The trouble is that the competency-based approach runs the risk of creating the illusion that skills can be developed independently of knowledge, precisely because the term competence was traditionally used in a work-related context and in the world of business and by extension, in professional training to denote the ability to carry out a specific task. Next is, this point brings us to the second problem linked to the combining the teaching of philosophy with the competency-based approach, which is the problem of assessment. One of the advantages claimed for the competency-based approach does concern assessment, which is more objective and accurate thanks to this approach. It is clearly the case to the extent that the assessment of a competence consists in determining whether a pupil has the ability to perform a given task effectively, that this assessment does indeed stand a good chance of being more accurate and better targeted. But in this same perspective, how are we to assess the competencies developed by the philosophy course? The capacity for abstract analysis and independent thought cannot be determined quite as easily as digital competence or communicating in a foreign language. It is worth reminding ourselves that many areas of knowledge are not directly useful, at least not in the short term, but they play a part in making the world intelligible and widening an individual's experience, notwithstanding. The concept of competence does not only evoke the application of knowledge through the performance of a particular task, but also its acquisition by the pupil who radically modifies it. It is a quality that is acquired over time. Number 5 challenge is what kind of teacher training is needed. The question of training for philosophy teachers is a fundamental issue if good philosophy courses are to exist. Several challenges need to be taken up in this area. The first of these challenges is that the training that teachers have received is not always adapted to the real demands of teaching at secondary level. The 2007 UNESCO study identifies three scenarios. The first is cases in which a university qualification in philosophy is required, as for example in Austria. At Master of Philosophy level in Bulgaria, it should be BA or MA. In Croatia, BA, that is 4 years of university and more. Second case is cases in which a teaching qualification is required in addition to or instead of a qualification in philosophy, as for example in Canada. In the province of Ontario, the Ministry of Education recently decided that BA in philosophy alone will allow graduates to apply for a place on a training course for secondary school teachers. In Finland, university degree plus a university qualification in secondary school teaching, but the degree can be psychology, or religious studies. In France, MA in philosophy and a certificate of aptitude in teaching at secondary level of the aggregation. And the third case is cases in which other qualifications like university degrees in other subjects are accepted for teaching philosophy. As for example, in Germany, in some Länder philosophy is taught by theology, literature, history, or mathematics graduates. In Cyprus, classics teachers are usually responsible for teaching philosophy at secondary level, and in Greece, an arts degree in ancient or modern level, Greek literature, history, or theology. So the second scenario is concerned in-service training, which is necessary for keeping the teacher's interest alive, improving and updating their skills and knowledge. The last case shows that the education system has a tendency to consider that teaching philosophy at secondary level does not necessarily require specialization. Thus, teaching philosophy might not be attractive to newly philosophy graduates. The third part of this book is teaching philosophy at tertiary level, higher ed. Philosophy is taught as subject in European and North American universities. It actually has a privileged status in universities because of the long philosophical tradition inherited from antiquity, which is embedded in the intellectual life of European countries. In United States and Canada, due to the centralized nature of education in general and particular, universities as a large measure of freedom in planning their courses. So the first challenge is philosophy studies and then what? So university stage is crucial to the future of the graduates in this level. Students decides on their path and chose the career they will pursue after finishing university studies. The evidence assembled by UNESCO on the links between philosophy studies and the labor market reveal a wide diversity of possible careers after a philosophy course in European or North America. The teaching profession has provided the most direct and the most common openings for philosophy graduates. Why teaching profession? They know that philosophy is often taught in secondary schools in Europe, and teaching philosophy at this level is the path taken by a large number of philosophy graduates. At the same time, teaching philosophy at university level is another important opening given the fact that many European and North American universities offer this subject to their students. Newly qualified graduates also have the choice of a career in university research, especially now when fields of study are becoming increasingly diverse. Other potential openings for philosophy graduates to consider are jobs linked to culture. Positions are open available in national cultural institutions such as museums, but also with publishers of scientific journals, which is the case in Croatia and Lithuania. In the Russian Federation and the Czech Republic, particularly, a critical and analytical sense combined with editorial skills make philosophy graduates ideal applicants for jobs in journalism. Apart from these possibilities, because of the general nature of philosophy as discipline, public service is also possible route for philosophy graduates in Croatia and Estonia. So number two challenge is philosophy teaching and diversity of approaches. So in Europe, teaching of philosophy is often found in a complex situation, particularly as a result of the political upheavals of the 1990s, which saw a reorganization of political and ideological systems. So it includes West German government decided that philosophy was not a priority area for report, both for ideological reasons and for economic reasons that were deemed to be central. Next is courses in Asia and African philosophy were discontinued. Courses which had been a compulsory degree component for all students reading philosophy at university in the former German Democratic Republic. Clear determination in the different countries to be completely rid of the Marxist-Leninist department of philosophy of the Soviet era. And last is Erasmus program set up by the countries of European as more flexible and varied. The number three challenge is mobility mechanisms and harmonization of academic degrees. What are the challenges? So Various kinds of higher education institutions in Europe and North America have been the most heavily involved to data in both exchanges and one-way flow of students, researchers, and features at regional and international level. So the first one is Bologna process. The objective is to find at supranational level that will make European universities more competitive on the world stage. So Bologna process, which was adopted in 1999, has made a provision for the creation of European higher education area, which will result in the harmonization of the university systems of the 46 countries that are signatories to the agreement. The objective is to find solutions at supranational level that will make European universities more competitive on the world stage. It seemed particularly appropriate given that exchanges were becoming globalized and easier to implement to prepare European universities for greater mobility. It goes without saying that the mobility of students, teachers, and researchers will also contribute to the mobility of teaching methods and ideas. Okay, so the next is Erasmus scheme, or it reflects the surge in intellectual mobility that is contributing to Europe's vitality as it allows students to spend more 3 months to a year studying in a European institution abroad, with staff being allowed to teach on the same basis. The community's action program for education and lifelong learning includes several sectoral schemes, notably Comenius, or teaching at preschool and school levels, Erasmus, or higher education, advanced vocational education and training, Jean Monnet, European integration of universities, support for institutions and associations active in the field of education at the European level. There are also schemes for international cooperation at higher education levels, such as the Erasmus Mundus program between the EU and non-member countries aimed at improving the quality of higher education in Europe and giving it world-class status. Other regional schemes such as Tempus for Western Balkans, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Mediterranean partners, ALPA or Latin for Latin America, and Asia Linked for Asia are focused on modernizing higher education in the partner country. The next challenge is number 4, the challenge of liberalizing universities. The Bologna process, for example, advocates a more hierarchically structured governance of universities based on increased autonomy. In France and Germany, likewise, this autonomy is taking the form of reduced commitment on the part of the state. Consequently, the private sector is being given a greater presence on university councils as it becomes more involved in university affairs. Moreover, this collaboration between universities and industry is positively encouraged by the Bologna process. The result is a rechanneling of university funding in favor of courses that best respond to the needs of the labor market. The next challenge is philosophy and academic freedom. What is at stake? One of the major roles of university and of philosophy teaching at this level is to foster intellectual debate in order to advance the state of knowledge. Um, in these debates, rather, the political, or in other words, issues relating to the evolution and future of the polis has a very significant place. However, for philosophy to be a genuine agora for public debate, the academic freedom of universities must be guaranteed. The number 6 problem or challenges is towards innovative and varied resources. In the majority of universities in the United States and of some European ones, distance learning is already an everyday reality. British appraises in the last Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education report on philosophy in 2001 comment that philosophy departments are increasingly making use of internet and intranet resources to enhance student learning. Three other reports observed that departments might wish to further consider developing and applying e-learning resources. It has been estimated that by 2009, 50% of the courses offered in the European Union across all disciplines will be available online, and 80% of students will use mobile learning in the majority of American universities. Lectures, seminars, and other forms of teaching are already available by podcast. The University of California, Berkeley, for example, puts the majority of its lectures online, organized according to semester. On the University of Oregon's website, it is now possible to view interviews and conversations with research professors, several of whom belong to the university's own philosophy department. Then the last challenges is philosophy teaching and interdisciplinary. The presence of philosophy classes extends well beyond the borders of philosophy departments, often through diffuse channels of single lessons or complements to other subjects. Structures, for example, in Greece, philosophy classes are given at the School of Methodology and History of Science as well as in law schools, and in Lithuania, in all faculties as a part of the general higher education. There is no shortage of examples, which demonstrates the fact that philosophy is a thought in a wide variety of contexts, including faculties of literature, gender, arts, and history. The high-level regional meeting on the teaching of philosophy in Europe and North America in Milan, Italy, on February 14 to 16, 2011, resulted in a list of recommendations, wherein they recommended that first, the member states of the region to national policy, planning, and administration of education to encourage the elaboration of education as well as to reaffirm the crucial importance of philosophy in education. The next recommendation is that the member states of the region also, through educational innovations, was recommended to promote research, academic, and pedagogical debates and support intercultural approaches in philosophy. Additionally, they recommend to provide and conduct comprehensive training that will develop teachers' critical thinking. However, the high-level regional meeting recommends the UNESCO to international cooperation in the field of philosophy teaching to intensify their initiatives in establishing links and creating networks between philosophers, teachers, and students from various parts of the world. The UNESCO, through strategic orientations and research, should acknowledge and support the philosophical and pedagogical research looking to its positive outcome in relation to philosophy for children. The high-level regional meeting reminds National Commission for UNESCO, specifically technical educational support to member states to support national initiatives on philosophy for children and to allocate funds for financial support to major philosophical events in international level. The European Commission Directorate General for Education and Culture plays an important role to strategic orientation by making efforts to maintain the practice of dialogue and questioning in education. And lastly, philosophy features. The meeting suggested that philosophy features and practitioners as well as civil society actors in exploring new approaches through philosophy teaching should foster critical exploration, promote different approaches, organize activities, and workshops that will support philosophy in education. So the high-level regional meeting on the teaching of philosophy in Europe and North America on February 14 to 16, 2011 in Milan, Italy, after 3 days of comprehensive discussion, seek to an appeal to create an international network for development and support of philosophy with children and practices. So that's all for my report. Thank you.